forth faith
Yes.
in his
Right,
heart.
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So he would hear the instruction of God. See, God found himself in a place where we were all walking in the valley of the shadow of death. Well, do you know what happens to your thoughts when you're walking in the valley of the shadow of death? It darkens your thoughts with the carnal mind. And you can't trust God from the carnal mind. And so God sat in a place where even if he could find a human that actually wanted to trust in him, they wouldn't be able to. Because they weren't indwelled by the Spirit.
Right.
And so they didn't have the thing they needed to put the thing together. So Jesus comes as a human in the valley of the shadow of death, but he's got the Spirit of life dwelling in him.
Yes.
Connecting everything, showing him everything, teaching him the Word.
Right. And so what's even more exciting is that's happening in us.
Yeah.
Because we have the Spirit too.
Right.
And that same growing in wisdom and stature, that same revelation, that same kind of understanding is happening in us. It may not be happening as fast, but it's happening.
I like how the King James Version uses the term, he who believeth on him. Because the same faith that was in Jesus is the faith that we believe upon. I mean, we do believe in Jesus, but we also believe on Jesus. And that is communicating the thing that he believed in, we also believe in. And the thing that raised him from the dead is the same thing that is going to raise us from the dead.
Amen.
Because we trust in the Father just as he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how the whole deal works. And so it's like we needed an interpreter because God was talking spirit, but we were carnal.
Yeah.
And so it'd be like a Chinese guy and a guy that speaks English.
Yeah, that's right.
Trying to talk to each other. The English guy ain't going to say anything the Chinese guy's saying, and vice versa. And so that's how it was with God and man, right? God is busy speaking spirit, and we were busy hearing through the carnal mind. That's why when Jesus is like, "Lest you drink my blood and eat my flesh, you have no part of me." And then he goes into what? My words are spirit and they are life. What was he saying there? He's saying, listen, I'm not talking about actually chewing my flesh and actually drinking my blood. I'm speaking about a truth there. But they were carnal, and what did they hear? What did they say? Oh, that's a hard saying.
Yes.
And then they all left. Right?
Yeah.
They all left, it said. Because they all heard, we got to chew his flesh.
You know, it's
Yeah.
how it's done.
So that's how it was with God and man.
Yeah.
God is talking spirit and life, and we were all the time carnal minded, and we were interpreting what he said through the carnal mind and getting it all wrong.
Right.
So we needed a human that could come that hadn't been corrupted by the carnal mind, but that was born of the Spirit, so that when he talked, they heard him.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And they could hear each other and fellowship with one another and understand one another. Right?
Yeah.
And so, here comes Jesus. But I love what Marie says. We believe the same thing Jesus believes. It's just Jesus saw everything we see in him in the Old Testament. We couldn't see it there, so he made it flesh.
Right.
And now we believe it on the same thing he believed on, by believing on him.
Yeah.
What did he believe? God wouldn't suffer him to see corruption. He wouldn't leave him in the grave.
Yeah.
He believed in the love of the Father. He abided in the Father's love for him. He abided in the Father's teaching and instruction to him that the Father wouldn't leave him in the grave, that he wouldn't suffer him to see corruption, but that he'd raise him from the dead by the strength of his hand and not the strength of Jesus' hand. Jesus believed on that. And now we believe the same thing through him.
Yeah.
Because we see God did it to him.
Right.
And now we see that's what God's going to do to us. And we see all Jesus did was believe God would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And now all we're going to do is be persuaded that's what God's going to do to us.
Yeah.
God didn't raise Jesus from the dead because he loved perfectly. I hate to break it to you guys. You can't love perfectly and have that conquer the grave.
No.
The loving perfectly was a result of him believing God would raise him from the dead.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the only way you can love people who are hating you and trying to take your life out is if you're believing in somebody else to care for your life. And so the only reason why Jesus wasn't against his enemies or hating his enemies is because he didn't think he had to preserve his own life. Because he believed in God to preserve his life. And so that animated him with love. So the real thing Jesus did was rest in God.
Yeah.
That's why I talked about you were a city on the hill.